All right. So again, thank you for joining me today. We're going to be covering a few different areas. So starting out as a brief overview, um, when you walk away from this program or from the webinar, the main goal is to be able to understand some strategies to be able to kind of build strength, flexibility, endurance into our everyday routines in our life at home. For the movements, or as we talk about exercises, this can all be done just with body weight movements is kind of the plan that we're able to be building. Though I will talk about how you can add upon that if you do have additional equipment at home, or if that is something that you eventually want to add into your routine. And what you learned here today will be able to can be taken in consideration for if you do have access to some sort of fitness center, or if you're kind of a corporate, the fitness center here as well. So strategies for building are all around strength. We're going to be talking about how to create those personalized exercise plans, how to avoid common workout mistakes. So we're going to go over form for some main movements. And then, yeah, exercises that can kind of fit into these at-home routines, as well as some additional tips at the end for staying motivated and consistent. We will have extra time at the end after I cover those exercises to answer additional questions. So I save time for that. So if you feel free to put questions along in the chat, I'll try to answer them as we go through the presentation, or I'll save some time at the end to do just that. So starting off, before we jump into kind of how to build those, I wanted to talk a little bit about our exercise guidelines for what experts say. So the ACSM is the American College of Sports Medicine. They recommend for two different things here. We have aerobic and anaerobic, so our cardiovascular as well as our strength. When it comes to recommendations, they recommend 75 minutes of vigorous activity a week, and or as a combination, 150 minutes of moderate activity. Again, that's for our cardiovascular goals. Now, for these guidelines, they are just that, just guidelines. So it will truly come down to what you personally want to achieve, what your goals are, and above that, what you currently have time for. That's the biggest thing. So consistency is going to be key for working up to our goals over time. When it comes to our strength guidelines, or more of that resistance training, it is recommended that we do 2 to 4 days a week covering all major muscle groups. Now, that can be very broad, and you can do up to 7 days of strength training, but truly, again, it comes down to what your goal is and what you are trying to achieve. But baseline, 2 to 4 days a week of strength-based or resistance training movements. And then for cardio, it's more of a time to receive those cardiovascular benefits of 75 minutes vigorous and or 150 minutes of moderate. All right, so when it comes to then balance and stretching, that is one thing that we also want to be able to incorporate somewhere into our routine, especially as we age. And I should mention that, going back slides real quick, for strength training. So the cardiovascular system is wonderful to try and improve and to receive those cardiovascular minutes over time, but we do want to, at some point, put a focus on strength training. So especially as we age, we want to increase our lean muscle mass. And depending on where women are when they age as well, it's going to be important to put a focus on maintaining and increasing our lean muscle mass and working strength training into more of a heavier realm. But now, balance and stretching. So this is also something that we want to incorporate into our routine. And now for a standard guidelines, it's going to be trying to aim for around 2 to 3 times a week over the course of your whole week. And then when it comes to the duration, so there's a couple different styles of stretching, starting off with stretching aligned with balance. For stretching, we have dynamic and static. So dynamic is going to be movements that are more rhythmic based. So you can kind of think your walking lunges, arm circles. Those are going to be movements that try and warm up our body. So things that are going to warm us up for exercise. And then we have our static, which are going to be more holds. So you're going to want to hold certain positions for somewhere between 15 to 60 seconds. And this can be done after workouts or in the evenings as a way to wind down. But a good blend of both in your routine is what's recommended. And then for the frequency, so you want to aim to stretch each major muscle group 2 to 3 times per week. If you want to focus on more kind of beneficial flexibility. If you can, every day can be useful for flexibility. Now, dynamic is going to be more, think of that as mobility or functional movement, and then static is going to be more for that flexibility or increasing our range of motion. For duration, it's going to be a little different depending if we're doing dynamic or static. Dynamic is going to be we're holding poses, well, not holding poses, poses for sets and repetitions. So 2 to 4 sets for each major muscle group, and then repetitions can be anywhere between 8 to 20 plus. So it really depends the movement and then truly how we're feeling in each individual stretch. For then static stretching, we're wanting to hold something between 15 to 30 seconds usually, but you can take that up closer to 45 to 60 seconds depending on the movement or what our goals are and where we're coming from. Some main focus areas. So typically in the corporate setting is what I see the most and what I work with the most is going to be the main areas, usually around the hips. Those hamstrings, hip flexors are really, really tight areas, as well as our lower back is typically kind of key areas that I like to put focus on when people come see me here in the fitness center. And again, just kind of as a quick shout out for that, you can always schedule a meeting with me either virtual or in person. But those midsection areas are a great place to focus. Otherwise, our shoulders are another area, and usually that comes, and all of these stimulates to what we do during the day, how we move, and when we move. So if and when we are able to get out of our desk and do some more movement, great, that's recommended. But typically in this corporate setting, we're stuck in a chair most of the day. So focusing on our desk ergonomics is going to be really important. We're not going to focus on that today, but feel free to reach out if you do have any other questions on that later. Otherwise, there's also great ergonomics folks here at Land Lakes that you can talk to. Lastly, breathing. So whether you're going to be doing aerobic, strength, or balance or stretching, our breath is very important to focus on during those times. For more of our stretching, we're going to want to make sure that we are breathing deeply through our stretchings and focusing on deep controlled breath through our stomach. So not a short, shallow breath through our chest, but deep through our stomach as we expand that diaphragm. And also another focus area is listening to our body. So whether that is strength training, aerobic, or flexibility, listen to your body. You're wanting to stretch to mild, I emphasize mild discomfort, not pain. Your body's going to tell you when and where you can stretch and go a little deeper and when you should back off. So really listen to your body because it's going to know best. Now for then balance, when we want to do balance, it's going to be the same frequency as stretching. Try to aim for 2 to 3 days a week to increase our overall balance. You can see benefit, even more benefit, if you do it every day. But again, it totally depends on our routine and what we are able to fit in and where. All right, now moving into more of creating that plan. First, I want to start off with kind of finding your mindset. So we're going to talk about SMART goals. They've probably popped up a lot over the course of your life, and that's because they're beneficial, and research shows that they do work. But starting off before that, to find our SMART goal, we really want to find out the why. If you've taken a few of my other webinars, you'll mention that this pops up quite often, and for good reason. We want to figure out that why behind our goals. Why is it going to impact us emotionally, mentally, physically, and why it's going to be beneficial to our life over the long term, why we want to prioritize that. So that really is going to help later on with our motivation and consistency. So finding out that why. And then when we got to make a SMART goal. So just going over this, I'm sure you heard before, but SMART, it has to be specific, measurable, relevant, and time bound. For all of our goals or any of our aspirations, it's good to kind of put them in that little box to make sure that we are able to reach them over time. So again, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. We want to be able to know, again, why we are trying to strive for something to achieve that goal and what it's going to benefit us when we do complete it. Now, another way which is going to be helpful for finding and this kind of building the baseline for making that plan. But we have to look at the steps it's going to take us to get there, the barriers and additional support systems we can add into our life. So when you're looking at an exercise routine, there is the general recommendations, and then there's going to be what fits best in your life. So they will be different, and that's okay. So if we are trying to strive for that, 150 minutes a week, great. That can be broken down into 22-minute sessions a day, or it could be broken down 3 days a week of 50-minute sessions. So it all depends on what we're able to incorporate into our routine. But the bottom line for movement, and what I hope you get out of this webinar, is we have to move more wherever and whenever we can fit that in. So again, there are going to be lots of guidelines, but they may not be able to apply directly to our current routines. So with that in mind, when we're looking at establishing our plan, I like to use the FIT principle. So the FIT principle is going to look at your frequency, intensity, your time, and type of movement. So looking at the frequency, that's going to be our how often. This is going to refer to how often you want to perform that exercise or activity. We've already talked about the guidelines. So when you're looking at your frequency, and this is something, feel free as we kind of talk about this to pull up a sheet of paper or something in the notes section and try and write through some of this as well. Obviously, a quick question here. So to clarify, going back to the guidelines, 75 minutes is going to be our cardiovascular goal. So cardiovascular, 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous. Separate goal then there, for the guidelines at least, is going to be 2 to 4 days a week of resistance or strength training. So over the course of your entire week, it's going to look like, well, again, if it's in a perfect world, you have 75 up to 150 minutes of cardio, and on top of that, 2 to 4 days a week of strength training. Now, if you do want to focus on weight loss, the recommended physical activity minute value there is 300 minutes. So if weight loss is a goal, which doesn't have to be, but if it is, 300 minutes is what you should be striving for a week. Okay, so moving then to the FIT principle. So we've already talked about those guidelines. Then for the frequency, we want to figure out how it plays out into our week. So that's where I was mentioning, feel free to pull up a calendar, or actually that could be great. Scheduling can be very beneficial. I know I was going to mention this at the tips at the end, but if we're able to schedule our activity, it does not have to be bouts of consistent 60-minute sessions. If we only have 15 minutes, great. If we need to modify our routine, sleep's still important, but maybe get up 15 minutes earlier, really prioritize our morning. If the whole, with kids, family, work, life, everything's busy, we have no time after work, then we have to find out a time when, if it's either during work or before work, we can fit that in, which I guess kind of goes into the time. But for that frequency, try to establish what your goal is and when we can fit it into our routine. Another quick question here. I don't want to miss it out because it is an important one. For the heart rate range, yes, of vigorous to moderate. So that's going to be based off our max heart rate. So 220 minus our age is going to be what our max heart rate is predicted to be at. Now then, determining for vigorous or moderate, vigorous, we want to strive for closer to 65 to 85+% of your max heart rate. Now, like anything, it's going to be progression. So if you're trying to strive for that vigorous heart rate, I wouldn't recommend immediately trying to max your heart rate out every time or be at 85%, but over the course of extended periods of time, try to gradually increase our heart rate to be able to sustain itself at that higher volume. Moderate is going to be closer to that 50 to 65% of our max heart rate range. So it's still elevated, but it's nowhere near the same level of vigorous. And you can also use a rate of perceived exertion, or an RPE scale, to determine kind of where that level is. So think about a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is we are sleeping, and 10 is the most challenging physical activity thing we can do. We are completely out of breath. We can't last any longer doing that. All right, so then moving back to our FIT principle with that frequency. So again, the goal is going to be to improve our overall fitness, gradually increasing the intensity and frequency our body is under over time. So if we look at that beginner graph here, it's going to start out doing a little bit of less activity a week. We have a few days that are complete rest days. And the way I say they're complete rest days is that over time, we want to turn those complete rest days into an active rest day, so that eventually, doesn't have to be today, might not be this week or this year, but looking in the future, we want to do something dedicated every day to try to increase our overall health and wellness. But starting out, that person is doing 3 days a week of aerobic training, 2 days a week of full body resistance training, and has 2 rest days. By doing that, they are reaching their full cardio and strength requirements. Then a schedule for someone a little bit more advanced, you see they're going to be doing movements, and we're going to talk about this in the upcoming slides. But as they're breaking down their plan, they're doing cardio, upper body resistance training. They have a lower body resistance training day, a solely cardio day, and then they break it down again, aerobic with more upper body, lower body, aerobic, and rest. So this person probably has a little bit of lighter cardio on the days they're doing their upper body days. They have their lower body days scheduled out. That's usually where I would put in more core. And then on their solely aerobic days is when that's probably more of a higher intensity. So over the course of their whole week, they have their 4 days of strength-based movements, and they also have 4 days a week of aerobic movements. And it's broken into where they're kind of they're striving for not only for the cardio goal. You can do a little bit of both, so you don't have to do all of one or the other, but a mix of both can help reach you towards those cardiovascular requirements. Now, for our intensity, that's where that heart rate comes in that I just mentioned. So that's going to refer to how hard you push yourself during the exercise session. So that's going to be the intensity. For cardio, that's usually going to be based off of your heart rate. So moderate or vigorous intensity. Moderate, again, that's closer to 50 to 65% of your max heart rate. Vigorous is 65 to 85+% of your max heart rate. Yes, it is safe to work at that higher 85+% of our max heart rate, but I put, stress or caution there. Work up to that value over time. It doesn't have to be right away, but gradually work up your heart rate to be able to withstand that intensity. Now, for that intensity, cardio specifically, you want to hold your heart rate at that specific range for your entire bout of movement. So if we are doing vigorous cardio and you broke that into a few 15-minute sessions, we want our heart rate to be at that elevated rate that entire time, which is why we gradually work up to it over time. For beginners, start with moderate intensity, gradually increase. And if you're a little bit more advanced, aim for that higher intensity variation, whether that's higher weights, like heavier weights, a faster pace cardio, or more repetitions, depending on the movement. Then moving on to time. So how long? Yes, we've talked about the guidelines. So find a way in your routine to make that fit. You may, and it comes back to that why. Why is it important to us? Why do we want to implement this into our routine? And with that, also think about our priority. What are other areas of our life that we want to prioritize, or are we prioritizing? And are we able to kind of navigate that where we're putting our values as well as our priorities in the right places? But for breaking out your time for cardio, those sessions can be anywhere. You usually want them a minimum of 10 minutes, so try to push it a little bit longer than 10 minutes, but at the very minimum, 10 minutes for a cardio session. Otherwise, strive for around 20 to 60 minutes, depending on your intensity. If you're going more moderate, thinking 30 to 60-ish minutes, and then vigorous, keeping it on the lower end, closer to 20 to 30 minutes. For your strength training, a minimum of, again, it all depends on the time. So if you truly only have 10 to 15 minutes, we can make sure you utilize that 15 minutes to 100% of what you can. And that's where, if you work with me, I'd be happy to help you through that. But otherwise, aim for at least 20 minutes of strength training, taking it around to 60 minutes or 90 minutes, depending on how much time you have. For then your sets and reps, it's going to be a range which is determined based on different exercises and what your goals are. I realize I didn't wrote that down, so I should have, but I'll write them here, or I'll say them here. So there's different forms of strength training. We have our I'll say true strength. We have more hypertrophy or maximizing building lean muscle mass. We have muscle endurance, and then kind of my general prescription I like to give people. For that true strength, usually I don't recommend everyone's going for, I put that in air quotes. Think that's going to be power lifters. So you're lifting your 1 to 3 rep max for only a few sets, and that's to make sure we are maximizing our muscle fiber recruitment. So usually I push people more towards hypertrophy to the general prescription, which I like to give people. So hypertrophy, that's going to be more within the range of, again, all these are going to be 2 to 6 sets. And then our repetitions is where these movements change. For true strength, that's between 1 to 5 repetitions, so very heavy. Hypertrophy is going to be closer to 6 to 8 to 10-ish for maximizing our lean muscle mass. And then our endurance is going to be 12 plus. So if we are able to do 12 plus repetitions, we are working towards our muscles endurance. So, and we're going to talk more about our body weight movements. And for some of those, over time, we're going to be able to build up past 12 repetitions, which is great. And that is where we are working in endurance. Yes, you will still build strength. You will still build lean muscle mass. But if we're talking about truly maximizing those, that's where these ranges come into play. General prescription exercises should be somewhere between 2 to 6 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions. And that's usually where I like to have people start. And then, yep, for time, being able to fit it into your routine. For then flexibility, because we already went over cardio and strength. Flexibility, 10 to 15 minutes per session based upon the type of stretching we are doing. And the goal is just going to be try to increase the duration of your workouts over time as your stamina or as your strength improves. Next, we go to type. So what kind of movement? This is going to refer to the type of movement we're doing based on our goals. Is it strength? Is it endurance? Is it flexibility? Is it balance? And this FIT principle will be applied. It can be applied in a broad spectrum, but we also are going to narrow things down into those categories. So strength, endurance, flexibility, balance, and then within that, find a way to incorporate that FIT principle to those individual exercises. And then I think I might have said that for time, but that'd be type. Yep. So our type is going to be the kind of movement that we want to implement. All right. On the timing question, I see a quick question in the chat here. Are there positives and negatives to working out before bedtime? Yes, there are. So it all comes down to kind of who you are as a person, what your routine looks like, what your day looks like. But if as a negative, if you sorry, I was just reading the last one. Yes, we're still on slide 7. We have not been advancing. This is all information under the FIT principle. But if you exercise right at bedtime, you will have a harder time going to sleep. It elevates it gets us more energy as we are performing the movement. So oftentimes people have a hard time cooling down before bedtime. So typically it's not recommended to exercise within 60 minutes of going to sleep because it will elevate your heart rate. It will, of course, there's benefits to exercise, and those benefits then they kind of appear at our night. So increased productivity, it will kind of decrease our restlessness, or it pretty much tells your body that we're in working mode and not sleeping mode. So that's kind of a negative to working out before bedtime. Now, as a positive, it will burn more energy. You will, feel tired after your workout, but it kind of goes hand in hand with who you are as a person and what your exercise routine looks like. And if you have no other place you can fit exercise, whether that's in the morning, around the middle of the day, or at night, you have to fit it in where you can fit it in. So if it is the nighttime, that's fine, and you just have to work around your sleep schedule. All right, now finally advancing from slide 7, exercise order. So now that we talked about the guidelines, we talked about how we can fit it into our routine with that FIT principle, let's talk about exercise order. So for activity orders, what should you do first? We have 2 main options here because we want to strive for both a cardiovascular goal as well as a strength-based goal. Regardless of what your overall goals are, we need to be incorporating both of these into our routine. So 2 options. We can either perform our aerobic followed by resistance, or that cardio followed by resistance, or resistance followed by our aerobic. So what are the differences? If we do option 1, we are putting more energy will be devoted towards building our cardiovascular endurance. So your body, as a pro here, your body is going to be fully warmed up for your resistance training. as kind of a con, your legs may not feel as strong as when they usually do if you do resistance training first, as you're kind of pre-fatiguing the lower body muscles, which can be a pro depending on your movements, or if you're wanting to avoid working with heavy weights. If you pre-fatigue exercises, as we'll talk about in the next slide, that can be beneficial. Option 2 is going to be resistance training followed by aerobic. And just as a reference here, whatever you do first is where your primary goal is. So if it's strength, you should be starting with strength. If it is cardio, start with cardio, because that's where we're going to devote more energy. So option 2, we're devoting more energy to developing our strength. Now our muscles are going to be fatigued before we attempt the light resistance of aerobic training or of that cardio. And this may well, this will cause more of a challenge for the aerobic training, again, because we are doing the strength first. And typically, typically we should be striving for more of reaching that muscle fatigue. So your cardio will see a little bit of a dip because of that, more on the muscle side. Now, cardiovascular system, that will still be ready to go, but more on the muscle side, it will have less energy in order to do more of that intense cardio, or depending on what cardio we are going to be doing. But bottom line here is whatever your goals, follow your goals. So whatever, that's going to decide the order, depending on what we want to do, what we want to strive for, but above all, also whatever you prefer. So even if you have more of a strength goal, but you prefer doing cardio first, great. Consistency is key. That's what we need to do in order to make progress over time. All right. Resistance activity order. So regardless if it's first or second, when we perform our individual exercises, there are 4 main options. Option 1, start with the large muscles, move to smaller muscles. You want to begin your workout with large muscle groups and work with multi-joint exercises. So that's going to be something like a push-up, like a squat, instead of a bicep or tricep movement, or isolating just one of my legs, or not a full leg, but like a hamstring or our quad. So you start with the large muscle groups, more compound movements, and then you work down to smaller muscle groups with single joint activities. So I'll start with a push-up, and then at the end of my workout, I'd lead more towards a bicep curl. Then we have option B. And I should mention it is recommended that you do large to small muscle groups in all of these options. So that's more, so large to small muscle groups is how I would formulate a plan. Then I would work into one of the other 3 categories: upper versus lower, push versus pull, and resistance activities versus aerobic. All different ways you can play around with your resistance training. Bottom line for this, I'll just mention first, whatever you enjoy doing is what's going to help lead you to success and progress down the road. So if you're doing something you really hate, that's going to really hurt our motivation. So try to find something that is able to be manageable within a routine. But upper versus lower. So if you are trying to save time, if we're thinking we have closer to only 20 minutes, we can alternate between lower activities with upper activities, as well as core activities. So I can do, and this is what's called supersets. I can do a pushing motion, or a push-up followed by a squat. And I'm working different muscle groups. So while my chest is recovering from the push-up, I work my legs, and vice versa. So that way I can get, you can squeeze more into your workout by performing it in that way. And we have push versus pull. Similar concept to upper versus lower, but with the same upper body. So I'm going to do a chest-based movement followed immediately by a back-based movement or a shoulder-based movement. And then I would just end up repeating. So that's push versus pull. So upper chest versus upper back. And then we have resistance activities with aerobic activities. So when we are strapped for time, but we want to accomplish both resistance and aerobic training, we can do kind of a combination of both. So I might do upper body strength activity for a little bit, and then lower body strength, and then move to core. And then at the end, I do 10 minutes of jogging, or 20 minutes of, or 20 repetitions of more body weight cardio activities like jumping jacks. And then you can repeat that again with our upper, lower, core resistance training, followed by different cardio intervals. So that's another way you can play around with your activity. All right, looking up, my lights turned off and here, I'll do some movement, but we'll be moving in just a little bit. So then breaking down that large to smaller muscles. So still with that in mind, we want to start out our activity or our warm-up or our workout with a warm-up. So dynamic warm-up is what's recommended for starting out. That's going to be the rhythmic-based movements, anything that we are doing to get our body primed for activity, which I'll cover those in just a little bit. Then during our exercise, we want to start with large, work our way to small muscle groups. We want to make sure that over the course of your whole training plan, we do work each individual muscle group at some point. Now, it all depends on how your training works out, depending on when we put what days together. You can have the same muscle groups worked in a week, but I usually would recommend a little bit of rest time in between, somewhere between 48 to 72 hours or at least 24 hours in between working the same muscle group, but usually 2 to 3 days in between doing the same muscle group another time. Make sure that we create balance over time. And then after, we're going to be doing a cool down or those static movements. Stretching is going to be what's happening in the cool down, and then foam rolling. Because if we're doing whether it's resistance or cardio, you are working your heart rate pretty hard during that time. And if we just stop and then, all right, time to go eat dinner, time to go back to work, our heart rate or our body doesn't adjust well to the immediate stop and start. So if we're short on time and okay, I run to the gym or I run at home and I immediately start my workout without a warm up, the body's not prepped or primed, and that's where injuries are most prone to happen, is because our muscles are cold and they're not ready to be worked out. So please warm up beforehand. It's not something that we should be cutting out. After, if you really want to improve your flexibility, your mobility, I do also recommend cooling down, as we can also let the heart rate recover from the movement. All right. On recovery. So reflecting on your areas of recovery for resistance training, we usually want between 24 to 48 or 72 hours of rest before training the same muscle group again. For aerobic training, usually you want about 1 day of rest or active recovery, such as walking or gentle bike ride or stretching in between your cardio-based movements. But listen to your body. So similar to that stretching, we want to make sure that we listen to our body. It will tell you kind of when you're sore. Now, with that, there is something called delayed onset muscle fatigue. So this will occur 2 days after your exercise. So if I do strength training on Monday, on Wednesday, I'm going to be more sore than I was on Tuesday because of delayed onset muscle fatigue. So listen to your body, slowly incorporate heavier weights over time, or change up your repetitions, which we can talk about, to keep your intensity increasing. But otherwise, for recovery, make sure we are hydrated, make sure we are getting enough sleep. Ask yourself those questions, somewhere between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. For hydration, trying to strive for around half your body weight in ounces, and then add 10 to 20 ounces for every hour of activity we add into our schedule. And we want to make sure that we are providing the right nutrition for our body to make sure we have energy to sustain ourselves. So on nutrition, different topic, but I will mention, if we wanted to work out in the morning, make sure we try to have something before our workout so that we have energy, because we've fasted all night. We want to make sure we have energy in our body to perform that workout, and we don't want to be burning any lean muscle mass. And then one quick question on delayed onset muscle fatigue. That is going to be caused by either resistance or cardio-based training. It's essentially our body's reaction to the muscle fibers trying to get stronger. So any movement we do can cause delayed onset muscle fatigue, and it's just the body's way of recovering. It's going to be more sore 2 days later than it is the day right after your training. One thing to mention, it is a common misunderstanding that no pain, no gain. That is false. I believe in happy pain is safe gain. So you do not need to be sore in order to see progress. Yes, you can be sore and see progress, but your body can adapt to movements, and you can still be increasing your intensity and seeing progress without being debilitatingly sore. So if that is a big hinderer of your exercise or consistency, start slow. Just slowly work your body through these movements. You will gradually increase the intensity over time, and then you can avoid kind of that sore, at least the debilitating soreness. There still will be soreness associated with it, but it does not have to be debilitating in order to see progress. All right. So time for a little bit of movement. If you want, feel free to join me with trying some of these movements out. But we're going to go over a few different exercises that you can implement into a plan for your upper, lower, core, full body movements, and then cardio-based movements. All right. Starting off, the most important thing I want to stress is going to be to avoid being to avoid injury. That sounds pretty self-explanatory. It's like, yeah, Colin, of course I don't want to get injured. But oftentimes what's going to happen is you're not going to get injured from your exercise. We're going to get injured from outside of our exercise because our form is not correct during our exercise. So if I'm doing squats or I'm doing lunges, and it might feel fine in the moment, or I might be doing core, and then 2 days later, that delayed onset muscle fatigue pops up. I'm like, oh man, my lower back is killing me. And then I reach down to grab a laundry basket or grab decorations from under the stairs or grab my groceries, and all of a sudden my back is out. So we are most likely to be injured outside of our workout time versus our very limited workout time that we do have in our schedule. So 3 pillars. This is probably one of the most important takeaways I want you to have from this webinar. There are 3 pillars for any exercise ever. We have our stance, we have our hips, and we have our shoulders. Those are the 3 pillars. One of those 3 pillars will want to break in any exercise if our form is off or if the intensity or the weight is too high. So we always want to make sure our stance is secure. Typically that's shoulder width apart, but that's going to be determined by the movement. Hips, very important. We want to make sure that our core is engaged. So with our hips, and feel free to try this out if you want, feel free to stand up. If our hips shift forward, that puts pressure on our lower back. So if I'm doing a core exercise or a squatting exercise, my hips are shifted forward, that is only bringing me lower back pain later. You should never feel lower back pain in any exercise. That means your form is incorrect. If you're like, oh, I do core, but I know my core is weak because my back hurts, maybe, but your form is off, and that is why your back is hurting. It's not because your core is weak. Now, from prolonged sitting, we can find more residual or chronic back pain in our lower back because of our posture. If I just pull my seat out real quick here. So if I'm not focusing on my desk ergonomics and I'm sitting here like this, my shoulders are rounded forward, my back is rounded forward, my hips are shifted forward, yes, now I will have lower back pain. I will have a harder time stabilizing my shoulders, and then my exercise can be affected because of that. So it's a whole body thing. Our posture, our form, it's very much connected. So even when or if you are still sitting here, check your posture. Are my feet shoulder width apart? Do I have a nice 90-degree angle at my knees? Are my shoulders set up and back? And then hips. Oftentimes, if you pop your chest up, your hips then round forward. Make sure they're shifted up. Shift your hips up like we're driving our belly button up. That's going to make sure we have a flat, neutral spine. That's going to be the same for exercises. So we still have those 3 pillars when we are any position. All right, but to the movements. So 3 pillars. We're going to start off with our upper body. I'm going to go down to the floor for push-ups. So push-ups are a great movement that we can incorporate for our chest. Now, with no equipment, there's a lot of body weight movements we can do, but if you have equipment, the exercises will skyrocket in what we have available. So push-ups. Starting out, if we cannot do a full push-up, we can modify by 2 ways. 1, we drop down to our knees, or 2, we go to a chair, preferably one that doesn't move or is up against the wall. So I would not recommend a free floating chair, but we can do an incline push-up that makes it a little bit easier to perform our push-up. Okay, 3 pillars. We'll show you here in action. We have our stance. It's established. My hips are shifted up. My core is engaged. My shoulders are set. So I'm not pushing overly through my shoulders. I'm not sagging at my shoulders. My core is engaged. My shoulders are set, and my stance is established. Now, with our push-ups, whether it's on our knees or our toes, we have a couple other angles that we want to talk about. One is our elbow angle for then our safety of our shoulder and our elbow. So if I'm doing a push-up, I want to make sure my hands are looking like this. They're around shoulder width apart, and I have 2 angles here. One, my elbow is between 45 to 60 degrees away from my side, from my ribs. If I go higher, closer to 90 degrees right here, that puts a lot of stress on my shoulders. So instead, Bring those elbows down. Yes, that's going to be more challenging, but your form needs to be proper so you can grow in strength and not have an injury. Oftentimes, if you've done a push-up before, people will start in a decent position and then because of their weakness or lack of strength, they'll flare their arms out and push up in this position, which is very stressful in the shoulders. Otherwise, we have the angle of my elbow to hand. Always keep my elbow in line with my hand. So if I'm doing a push-up and my hands are too far out front, that's going to put a lot of pressure here on my elbow. If my elbows are too wide out to the side, that puts pressure on my elbow. So make sure that the elbows remain above the hand. All right, set the shoulders, brace your core. Make sure that flare is 45 to 60 degrees. You control down and pressing up. We can modify by dropping down to our knees. Another way, kind of a half modify, is we start up, full push-up down, drop to the knees, and press up. This is a great way we can modify that push-up. For gradually working up to a push-up, one way, and this kind of goes for everything, but if we cannot do a full push-up, one thing I see oftentimes is we'll do this form of kind of a half push-up, or we go on one, you have a stronger side or a muscle imbalance. So we will push up from my right arm first and then the left. And that over time will cause even of a greater muscle imbalance. So what I recommend is controlled negatives. If we cannot do a full push-up, we try to still work through a full rep range. So I might, instead of doing kind of half push-up on the way down and back up, I recommend either switch the movement to a chest press if we have soup cans or something we can use. But anyways, for the push-ups. So a controlled negative, we control all the way down. And then even if you need to roll to one side to get back up, we're controlling that negative down. Now, if you can control to a nice halfway point and press back up, that's all right too. Or we can work in that bottom range of motion. So I control all the way down and I'm doing half reps on the way up because I can't get all the way back up. All right, that's kind of the baseline for push-ups. I know I went over that very in depth, but it's a very important movement. Now, to target different muscles, chest, we can do just a neutral push-up, hands just wider than shoulder width apart, elbows flaring 45 to 60 degrees. If we want to target our triceps, bring those hands in close, performing a close grip push-up, or elbows are close to our ribs. That's going to target our triceps or the back of our arms. If we want to work on our shoulders, a shoulder push-up starts at a slightly higher angle. We start from up here. Yes, my hips are elevated, but that is because I'm performing the motion like this, trying to engage. So think downward dog push-up as I try to engage a little bit more of my shoulders with those movements. Otherwise, dips is a great movement that we perform for our triceps as well as a little bit of our chest, but for the back of the arm. Preferably a chair that does not move, so against a wall or a couch. We can bring those legs out, control down to 90 degrees, and pressing up. I'm bracing through my shoulders. I'm engaging my core. I have my stance established. If you want to modify, bring that foot back and assist with those chair dips. Excellent. Okay. Then we have our shoulder movement. So shoulder movements are difficult. The two body parts that are very hard to work at home with no weight, with no exercise bands, without any dumbbells, are our shoulders and our back. That's quite challenging to do. Not impossible, but challenging. So for our chest, we cover that. Shoulders, we can do more of a shoulder push-up. Another one we can do is more shoulder holds. So if I'm doing something like shoulder taps or up downs, those are great for my shoulders with body weight movements that we can just do at home. Now, exercise bands are fairly cheap. So if you do have the availability to invest even $10 to $20 into an exercise band set, that will dramatically increase the amount of exercise we can do. Because otherwise, those are pretty much the only shoulder movements we can do at home, body weight. But with bands, now we can go into more of an overhead press. We can go into a lateral raise. We can perform a Rudel fly. And those are all ones that, so those three I just mentioned, will target the three heads of our deltoid. And that's with bands. Otherwise, if we have things around the home, so soup cans, water bottles, if you milk jugs, so save your milk jugs, whether it's a half gallon or whole gallon filled with water, we can perform frontal raises, Now here, still think of those 3 pillars, establish that stance, shift our hips up, bracing our core, set those shoulders up, back, and down, and we're driving up. Or lateral raise out to the side with those milk jugs. And the nice thing about milk jugs is, well, it's a one-time fee, and we can fill them up with different levels of water based on how heavy we want them to be. For the shoulder press, still think of that as like a push-up. I have those angles. We want to make sure that we're not flaring out here to 90 degrees. Keep those elbows in front of us. Keep that the hand right above our elbow. Control just down under 90 degrees. And exhale as we press up. We're going to be slightly in front of us. If you can see my elbow positioning over right to that side. If I go right to the side, that's going to put a lot of stress on our shoulders where we do not want. Okay, I'm going to have to speed this up just a little bit. Lower body. We have our squats or the squats. Now, this is a very challenging movement we can to perform. Now, typically, because of the corporate environment, our hamstrings are very tight, our hip flexors are tight, and it's hard to mobilize into a squat. So what I typically see happening is because of the lack of mobility, those knees, if you watch my knees go forward, a prime example of a proper squat, set the shoulders, shift our hips up, engage the core. We push our hips back, controlling down and pressing up. You want to go as close to 90 degrees as you can, but everyone's mobility is at a different spot, so listen to your body. So again, if my hamstrings are super tight, I end up going forward because I can't push my hips back, or my hips go back, but that's as far as they go, and then I end up hinging. So a squat will sometimes look like this. If you have challenge with your squats, feel free to meet with me on the side. I'll be happy to work with you on that. But you can also start with chair taps. So set the shoulders, brace our core. We're just fully sitting down. And then if you need, push off the chair to get back up. Control sitting down and press. And then over time, we take that sit to a light tap. And then eventually we take the chair away altogether. But if you're looking at my knees, actually I'll step back a little bit here. My knees are going to stay back behind my toes. So as I push my hips back, they're never going over my toes. They're always staying back as I push my hips back, keeping my chest up. Now, as we add weight, make sure that core is engaged, because oftentimes we'll go into that squat, the hips will shift around forward, then that's lower back pain central. So shift the hips up the entire time. Even if that means we don't go as low, keep your form solid over range of motion. Range of motion can come with time. All right, those are our squats. Slow lunges. 3 of them I'll give you. We have a forward lunge, reverse, and a lateral lunge. So that forward lunge, we can do alternating, or we can do single-sided movements. So we're controlling down and pressing back. A forward lunge primarily targets the quad. It is a full leg movement, but we're going to get more activation through our quad. Unlike what I did there, your knee does not need to touch the ground. For a reverse lunge, this is going to be more of a hamstring, or that back leg is pushing off the floor. Watch this front knee. It stays right up above my heel the entire time, controlling back and pressing forward. Again, this stance is very challenging because I need mobility in my hip flexors, in my hamstrings, my quads to perform this movement. So work to a range of motion that fits you best. Focus on the form over the depth. And lastly, a lateral lunge. Great for our glute meads, those side hips. I step to the side, push my hips back, and pressing forward. You can alternate, or you can do one on the same side like I'm doing here, but here's alternating. Push from one side to the other. Side profile, we are stepping to the side. Knee is staying right above and behind my toe. Press my hip back and then push through my glute med on the side. Okay, step ups are also great. I would not recommend a free floating chair, but we can step up, drive that knee up, and controlling down. If you want, you can switch every time. That one is great. This one's great for our balance and mobility. Listen to our body, listen to our range of motion for those movements. Okay, moving on to our core. There are 3 different main areas for our core. We have twisting motions, crunching motions, and then the other one is going to be more isometric holds. We'll start off with those holds. Isometric holds are going to be something like the plank, where we're holding a pose or contracted position for an extended period of time. Set my shoulders, set my stance, shift my hips up, engage my core. Pillars are set and engaged. Then here's my perfect plank. Just hold in here for an extended period of time. Other forms of holds, we can do the hollow hold, lying flat on our back, engage our core, feet fly up above, hands as well, and we're holding here. This is a hollow hold. So we're holding a contracted position. Those are number one. And there are limitless exercises. So I'd be happy to send, as a follow-up, I'll send a list of exercises or kind of mock plans that you can implement into your routine. But otherwise, feel free to put your time requirements into a source like ChatGPT and then it'll spit something out to you. You can use that or then send that over to me. You're like, hey, Colin, this is what I came up with. Feel free to take a look. I'd be more than happy to check things out for you. All right, so we have our isometric holds. Next, we have more of those twists. So twists are going to work our obliques or the side of our abdominals. So we have our plank twists, shifting side to side. We have our Russian twists. Set the shoulders, lean back, shifting from one side to the other. Now, there's always ways to modify for the Russian twist. Feet are on the ground. I can advance by lifting up the feet or grabbing a dumbbell, or again, let's grab that milk jug. I can always modify by adding more contact. If I'm in this plank twist position, I can drop to my knees, shifting from one side to the other. But those are our twists. Another good twist is going to be our heel touch or penguins as we twist from one side to the other. Relax the neck, engage my core. Now, anytime you're on your back or doing core in general, you need to focus on that core engagement. Shift your hips up, think flat, neutral spine. Lastly, we have our crunching or kind of full extending. So think of more leg raises or our V-sits. For the V-sit, we can have it be more advanced, no assistance. We can assist with the hands, or we can lie down, bring the knees to the chest. There's combo movements such as like a bicycle crunch, where we're doing a crunch in addition to an oblique twist. So there's a lot of variations. It's good to incorporate those main three. So isometric holds, twists, and crunches in, well, not crunches the exercise, but the crunching motion. Crunches aren't usually my favorite, but they are sometimes good to put in there. Okay, full body. So for full body movements, if you have a lack of time, if we can do more of a HIIT or boot camp style workout where we might be doing 40 seconds of work, 20 seconds of rest. So going back to just after the FIT principle when it comes to exercise selection or kind of where do you put exercises in. If you're doing more of that boot camp, that's going to be then kind of playing around with the time. So pick 8 exercises, do 40 seconds of work on a timer, 20 seconds of rest, and I do that 5 times, and that's a great workout. Okay, and again, I will provide extra exercises as well as plans laid out for people, and then happy to talk through other stuff as well. Okay, anyways, full body. We have a burpee. For that burpee, you control on the way down. So I'll do the modified one first. Control down, step back, no push-up, step up, and stand. More, advanced, is drop down, drop back, push up, together, and jump. That's going to be the more modified version of that burpee. Great full body movement. Jump squats. I'm controlling down, jumping up, control that landing. Make sure we still are pushing our hips back and keeping our core engaged during these movements. You can also do a weight and kind of press it up at the same time, or again, grab that milk jug. Mountain climbers on the floor, handheld plank position, driving knee to and through the opposite side. We can take it in a controlled fashion, or we can do more of a HIIT boot camp style as we drive that knee up, engaging the core as we do so. All right, and then skater jumps. One of my favorites for our glute medius or the side of the hips. We are laterally bounding side to side. Modified form, we have our V-step, or we can fully bound from one side to the other. And that can go a little bit more advanced by touching the ground on other sides. Okay, and then combo moves are a great way to fit more into your plan if you have less time. So I can perform a lunge with a bicep curl. I can do a lunge and twist one way or just the other. If you're doing one way, I'd recommend twisting in towards that foot that you step forward with. Great way to get a little bit of core engagement in addition to that lunge. And then mountain climber push-up is kind of the last one I have on there for a combo move. So we'll perform that mountain climber and push-up. This can be done on knees too. It's a little bit harder to do mountain climber on knees, but we can drive one side to the other. I would recommend mountain climber slow on toes, knees, push up. And that's the way we can combo move that exercise. Okay. That's going through the main movements that I like to put in plans. Great body weight movements. Okay, so quickly going over here because I do want time for questions. At-home equipment. So there's a lot of cheap equipment out there that you can use into your plan to kind of spice things up or add some variety. So there are DVDs or computer programs if you want something built out. Feel free. Otherwise, I'd be happy to change this because of the light. I'd be more than happy to work with everybody on coming up with a plan or reviewing what you already have done. Exercise bands are a great way to add a little bit more. So if you look or think back at all the exercises just performed, you can grab a milk jug, which is virtually free. Or with bands, you can do almost all those with bands. With a push-up, wrap the band around my back. My frontal raise, I step on the band as I raise it in front, lateral raise to the side. Now back, that's one movement I specifically did not do because there are very, very few exercises you can do for a lower back with zero equipment. Now with bands or milk jugs, we can then end up performing something like a bent over row where we are driving our elbows up, squeezing shoulders together. Now still think here, neutral stance, engage my core, set my shoulders. My elbows are flared 45 to 50, 60 degrees. You see my hands are still in line with my elbows as I squeeze up. So bent over row is an excellent variation we can add in there. All right, stability ball, wonderful for balance or for extra intensity. If I'm doing a push-up, I can put my feet on the ball, and then that's a decline push-up, even more intense. Or I can do my push-ups off the ball. It's an incline push-up, making it more a little bit more modified, but it is kind of moving side to side, so it adds extra core in there. Otherwise, we already talked about exercising with our own body weight. For larger equipment, if you have the availability to add in something like a bike, a treadmill, elliptical, or rower, that's one way you can really increase or improve on kind of your home gym. Otherwise, if you already own a bike, I would recommend just getting a back wheel contraption. They're a lot cheaper, and you can just set up your bike in home so that way you can ride your bike and you don't need to get a whole nother exercise bike or something for that. Okay. Otherwise, coming down to the last few slides here, making time when it comes to more of the motivation and consistency. So try to make time whenever you can. Morning workouts have numerous benefits, including it can help regulate your appetite. It can boost your energy. And one of the biggest benefits as all is an AM workout secures that we do finish our workout and are able to check that off. So if you really don't know where to fit it in or can't fit it in, try the morning. You might not be a morning person. And if we have nowhere else we can put it, we might have to stick it there. And that's something we have to try to work in over time to our routine. But try to make it a part of your daily routine wherever we're able to get that in. And we can actually combo it with other habits we already do. So like eating or brushing our teeth, try to, or even household chores, do vacuum squats. Every push out of my vacuum, I do a squat. Yeah, it's going to take a lot longer, but that's how we can add it into our routine. So it doesn't have to look like, all right, here's my 30 minutes of dedicated strength training or resistance training. We can really make it modified to what truly we can add into our routine. So if it's squat vacuuming or lateral raise dusting, isometric hold dusting, where we're holding one milk jug and we're doing something with the other hand the whole time, or holding a bicep curl, we can really find a way to navigate and fit it into our routine so it can fit. And that's the biggest thing, is we have to be able to make it fit. With that, don't overcommit. Setting those realistic goals is very important. If we strive for, all right, one day I want to work up to 7 days a week of doing something movement based, great. But what can we start with right now? If it is just 2 to 3 days a week, that is awesome. If it's one day, excellent. Meet yourself with the level you are currently at. All right. Yes. So make sure you're realistic about where you're at, what you can achieve. You want to progressively overload and increase the intensity over time, listening to your body as you do so. And another thing, just to help kind of with motivation, is to make it fun. Yes, exercise. There is work in, work out. So it is meant to be challenging, and that's how we will see progress. But with that, we want to be able to make sure that we're not dreading it, as that's kind of when our form could slip up, or or just our motivation could crash. So try to find something in the movement realm that we enjoy. If it's taking walks and bird watching, excellent. Maybe I can bring a little weighted backpack and do some squats or some bodyweight movements outside. Really try to play around with exercise and find a way that it fits into your routine with what you can comfortably do consistently. Yeah, be creative with it. And over time, you want to make sure that you're also rewarding your good behavior. So it's important to focus on the small checkpoints in our goals, and to reward yourself for the progress that you've made, and be forgiving with yourself, because that's going to be crucial. We're going to slip up over times. Don't count that as a failure. Count that as a place we can reassess, look at what happened, and try to progress forward through there. Okay, now this is just kind of the resource that you have available to you, but I wanted to please feel free to come off mute or put anything in the chat. I'll answer questions right now. Otherwise, just as a reference, the Fitness Center, we adjusted our fee structure, so it's $1 per day, up to but not exceeding $20 a month. That can be virtual or in person. You can meet with me for consultations, check-ins, fitness assessments. And a lot of pretty much almost all our amenities are virtual for any employee or any production worker. So please feel free to spread the word about the Fitness Center. I'm more than happy to talk to you about any of your health and wellness goals and how we can navigate something that's going to work best for you.